Welcome, fellow horror hounds, and welcome to the latest episode of Talk and Stalk, your unholy home for horror. I'm your host, as always, Barry, and today's podcast is devoted to a horror movie released in '79, and that is Tourist Trap. Now, Tourist Trap is very much a slasher movie, but it's one that stands out from the crowd. This is one that certainly is quite unique. It definitely has a very supernatural edge to it. And when it was released, I don't think the slasher subgenre had really been fully forged at that point. Halloween was released the previous year, but I don't feel like it was really until Friday the 13th in 1980 where slasher movies were really starting to be churned out left, right and centre. Now, as I say, with Tourist Trap, I'm going to go right off the bat here. I feel like that this is a film worthy of more attention. I think Tourist Trap, certainly among the ardent horror fans, the ardent slasher fans out there, this does actually have a bit of a cult following and all that. But again, I don't think this is really one that really gets that much attention. Now, this film clearly takes a lot of elements from various other films. There's definite echoes of House of Wax here. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, there's a very Texas Chainsaw Massacre vibe to this movie as well, particularly in the mask and kind of like the whole kind of rural, out in the middle of nowhere kind of setting. Carrie, without a doubt. The killer in this movie actually has telekinetic powers, and it's very obvious right within the first 5 to 10 minutes of this movie that this is a different kind of horror movie. This isn't your kind of run-of-the-mill kind of slasher flick, if you will. So yeah, there's a definite Carrie aesthetic there. And also Psycho, without going too much into it as well. There's mentions of this being off the beaten track, you know, as soon as they built the highway, for example. And the killer, spoiler alert, anyone listening to this, I'm going to hope has seen Tourist Trap, but if you haven't, just to pre-warn you, there are going to be a lot of spoilers here. There is actually a plot twist. We're introduced quite early on in the film to, I believe it's Mr. Sloan, I think his name is, and we learn quite early on that he has a brother, and his brother actually come up with the waxworks and all that, and his brother was very mechanically minded and all this and that. And, you know, we see this guy wearing a mask, you know, the killer of the movie, and of course we're led to believe that this is a brother. Well, the twist is that he's actually Mr. Sloan, and that he did have a brother, and he'd actually murdered his brother, and presumably he takes on his brother's personality now. And there's, as I said, a very kind of definite Norman Bates Psycho element there, which I think they clearly used as kind of an inspiration for this. Now, you know, as I said, getting back to like the opening of this film and that, you know, we see a guy killed quite early on. There's these mannequins and all that laughing maniacally and all this and that, and things are actually being thrown out of the cupboard, which I believe was actually filmed with the cabinet, which was actually nailed to the ceiling. And the crew were on top of the ceiling actually flinging items straight down. So when it's shown in the film, it actually gives you the illusion that the items are flying straight out. It's really quite well done. And for anyone that's scared of mannequins and finds mannequins quite creepy, which I do, there's plenty of mannequins in this film. There's a few shots, I think the mannequins are actually quite creepy. You see some shots of the mannequins' kind of eyes moving and that. But of course, we realise that it's the killer with the telekinetic powers that is actually using this. He's using his abilities here. Now, this is actually, quite shockingly, despite it having quite a disturbing subject matter, this was actually a PG-13 rated horror movie. This isn't a film that's sexual, nor is it gory or anything like that. I think, you know, the disturbing matter of it comes from, you know, the whole kind of mannequin and the telekinesis. And I will admit that the mask in this film is actually quite creepy. Now, the killer actually wears multiple masks, but the very first mask especially, I do actually find quite creepy. And it's actually very reminiscent of Leatherface's mask almost, from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And the actor that actually played the killer in this film, Mr. Sloan, was Chuck Connors, who I believe was only third choice for this film. Jack Palance, which would have been quite a bit of star power, was originally first choice. But he actually turned it down. And of course, Jack Palance, just a few years later, starred in Alone in the Dark, released in '82, which I think is a very underrated and very often overlooked horror film. But I think the original script for this as well actually called for nudity. But basically, yeah, to try and keep a PG-13 rating, for example, it was decided no nudity whatsoever. And I do know that Stephen King actually praised the film. Stephen King was a big fan of this movie, especially the opening to this film. And, with this movie, there's kind of little in the way of plot. It's a group of teens that arrive at this place. The car breaks down. Now, I do believe it's actually subtly implied that Mr. Sloan was actually responsible for their car breaking down. And I quite like the title to this film, actually, Tourist Trap, because a tourist trap is obviously something to lure in tourists, for example, get as much money as they can. But at the same time, the double meaning with this movie is, tourists, it's a serial killer. Tourists are brought in for them to be murdered in this movie. Now, I want to say about the score, I really like the score in this film. That was actually co-composed by Pino Donaggio, who, of course, just a few years prior, actually composed the score for Carrie, which was obviously the very first Stephen King novel to be adapted for the big screen, and that movie had a great score, and I really do like the score to this film. It's not one of the iconic classics like the likes of Halloween or Suspiria or anything like that, but the score perfectly complements this film, in my opinion. I think it's got a really good score. Particularly, it really complements them scenes of surrealism where the mannequins are all kind of like, presumably, moving on their own and, taking on a life of their own. Now, from what I also understand as well, in the original script, telekinesis was not going to be part of the storyline. I do believe in early rights, it was actually going to be the mannequins and that would actually take on lives of their own. And then it was decided that the killer would be given this unique ability of telekinesis. And it's interesting also that the producer of this movie, Irwin Yablans, a financier, of course, became big especially for Halloween. He actually hated the score for this movie. And he actually wanted a synthesized score that was very similar to Halloween, in the very same kind of tradition and that. But I actually think the score works really well for this movie. And also, the laughter, a little fact, the laughter, which is very prominent in the opening sequence where all their mannequins are laughing and all that. I believe that laugh was created for the laughing hyena at the zoo in Disney's Lady and the Tramp, 1955. It's actually the very same laugh that they actually used for this movie. Now, obviously, getting back to the movie itself, we get the big kind of plot twist that Mr. Sloan is the killer. Now, for modern audiences, I think you'd see it coming right off the bat. But obviously this was released in '79. People hadn't seen too many films like this. But obviously the reveal there is, and there's actually a shot not long afterwards that I think's awesome, that I really do like. And that is where he actually holds up, he's wearing the mask, he's chasing her through the woods. And he holds the head up of the mannequin. He's like, "You want a friend?" And the mannequin kind of screams, opens its mouth. And then there's another shot where the mannequin head's kind of on the floor. And again, it slowly turns around. He's obviously controlling this. And then opens its mouth and screams again. I think they really make good use of the telekinetic ability that the killer actually has in this film. The second woman, that's the second victim, that is actually killed in the movie, is actually strangled with her own, I'm not sure what it is, I'm not sure what it's called actually, it's around her neck, and the killer slowly is using his ability to slowly strangle her to death. As I said, this film is not overtly graphic in any shape, way or form. It's very tame in terms of its violence and that. But it's still a film that manages to be pretty disturbing. in places. As I said, especially, I think the score really helps it in that way. And as I said, there's a lot of shots of mannequins. And this is one of the very few slasher films in horror film history to get a PG-13 rating, which is pretty much unheard of today. With this film as well, we learn early on with Mr. Sloan that basically he's living out there. He's kind of living in the past. He's living there, this old museum. It's gone now, it's decrepit, but he's keeping everything there for the memories and all that. And we learn that his wife, later on, his wife died. He's absolutely in love with his wife, completely besotted with her, but we find out that she's dead and that he actually killed her, and that his brother, who is apparently the one running around with a mask, is actually dead as well. They were actually cheating on him, they were having an affair, and he killed them. And I'd imagine in a result of a damaged psyche, he's carrying on with the brother's personality, and I'd imagine obviously wearing the mask with a wig and stuff, maybe his wife. Now, there is actually a mannequin that is actually the spitting image of his wife. Now, it's obviously there to hold the memories, as a tribute and that to his wife. And I actually think there's a creepy little scene quite late on in the film where he actually uses the final victim, who actually, in kind of a thing to Dracula, if you will, the main final girl, if we'll call her that for the sake of the podcast, that she reminds him of his wife, and he actually puts this mask on, this wax mask mannequin mask on her face, and it really is quite creepy. And then he's trying to make out with her, passionately kissing her and all that, while she's wearing this creepy mask. And there's actually a death earlier on in the film as well that is quite sadistic in nature. It's not overtly graphic or anything like that. It's where he's actually, because I've got to say, the way he talks is kind of creepy, actually. But he's actually talking to her as he's actually got her tied up to a table, I believe it is, and he's putting all the wax thing. He's obviously going to make her into a waxwork, and he's actually putting it all around her face, and he's explaining that your heart's gonna give out, you're gonna die of shock, your face must be burning now, etc. And he's kind of talking her through the entire process as to what's gonna happen to her while he's doing it. As I said, there's nothing really violent or anything like that. It's just the fact of he's telling her that, look, you're gonna die, your heart's gonna give out, we understand that we learned that this place used to get a lot of visitors in the day. They used to charge people $25 to $30 to swim in the local pool thing there. They used to get 25 to 30 visitors a day, but it's essentially, it's kind of a ghost town now. It's a graveyard. I think this film actually as well was shot in just 24 days as well. And I believe one of the guys actually, the guy that actually jumps through the window actually did his own stunt as well. I think he almost hurt himself in the process of that. But there's definite, as I said, Texas Chainsaw Massacre echoes with this movie. And again, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a film that's very raw, very visceral, but there's actually very little in the way of bloodshed in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's the way it was filmed that's where much of the movie draws its power from. And I think with this movie, it's really kind of like the subject matter. Now, I believe that David Schmoller, the director, actually originally wanted Carpenter to direct it, which would have been straight after Halloween, but due to issues with, I think there were financial arrangements and scheduling, it ended up going to him as well, and I think the budget was $800,000 as well. So this was actually on. The budget was considerably bigger than Halloween, in regards as well to the film, the overall plot, there's one scene in the film actually that's kind of like, I think it felt like it was completely there for comedic value. It's after the killer reveal. We know it's him, I believe. I'm pretty certain it's revealed at that point. And he's actually sitting there and he's trying to feed one of the mannequins. And obviously the mannequin's talking to him. Obviously it's him doing it, etc. It's just kind of like random little scene, and then the head falls off the mannequin, and he says something along the lines of, I really should get that fixed. Um, yeah, it just feels like it's there for the comedic value there. And there's actually another scene in the film that I really do like that's quite late on in the movie, where one of the girls is trying to get away. In my opinion, she's actually one of the most attractive women in the history of slasher movies, but her character name is completely escaping me. She's actually trying to get away in that, and he's using his powers for all the mechanical soldiers in that to fire at her. So they're all shooting at her, and she's trying to go through. And then I just really like that whole sequence. Again, I think it's just making good use of the of the gimmick, of, if you will, the concept. And she actually ends up getting a hammer, which is thrown by one of the Native American Indians. She gets it to the back of the head. And of course, at the end of the movie, in kind of a surrealistic moment, you know, all of the mannequins are kind of coming to life and all that. And again, it plays that kind of creepy score to accompany it. And he's actually dancing with the mannequin of his wife, and he's twirling around. And the final girl, she's looking, and all of a sudden, it's kind of like she sees the real wife going around, which I can only imagine is in her imagination. And of course, he gets killed. He gets an axe to the back. And there's actually a moment like shortly before that as well, which is kind of almost nonsensical to me, but hey, it's where the male survivor, the only male survivor, actually comes along, and he's trying to save her and all that, and he's talking, he's like, we've got to get out of here. And then you actually realise it's been turned into a mannequin. I mean, clearly, it's very obvious that, and at the end of the movie, when all these mannequins are, moving around and, turning on the girl, you can actually tell that they're actually using real actors in quite a few of the shots. And obviously, at the end of the movie, you can tell it's the real guy. But then, of course, in a little bit of a twist, if you will, it turns out he's actually a mannequin himself. And then he just takes his arm off, rips his arm off, and twists his head round and, removes it. But yeah, I think Tourist Trap, I think it's a film that does a lot right, in all honesty. Do I think it's one of the best films of the genre, of the subgenre? Probably not, but it's still, I think it is one of the better examples. I think Tourist Trap is, I think it's a film that does deserve to be talked about more. I think it is unique for the concept. I actually do think The Mask is quite creepy as well. I think as well, to achieve Becky's death in the film, I just had to look up her name because I completely forgot it. A block of wood was taped behind her hair, and a knife was attached to a wire that was thrown at the back. So the knife basically stuck into the block. I believe that's actually the totem death as well. As I said, the deaths that happen in this movie are this isn't a film that has a really high body count. I believe, including the killer, there's actually 6 people that are actually killed during the course of this movie. And of course, the final shot of the film as well is her basically driving away with the mannequins in the back of the car, which I'm not really sure what that says. I'm not sure if she's gone crazy or she's just kind of like attached to I don't know, but it's the final shot of the film. So yeah, she's got her mannequin friends actually in the back of the car with her. And there's actually an unidentified actor named Shaliar Kobe, I believe, that's credited as Mr. Slausen's brother in the film, the credits. But of course, there is a twist that it turns out it's him, dissociative identity disorder. I believe the name that they actually used on the credits, Shiloh Kobe, was made from the first and middle names of the actor's son, Shiloh and Kobe. So basically, it was a fake credit because obviously they couldn't credit him as being the brother as well, because obviously anyone that notices it, then obviously, the game's over. But yeah, I mean, obviously these are the days before IMDb as well. So they basically used a fake credit to try and throw people off. They did a similar thing, again, getting back to Psycho. When Psycho was being filmed, they basically there was some famous photographs of a chair which had Mrs. Bates on the back of it. And it was kind of like kept very anonymous as to who the actress was going to be actually playing Mrs. Bates. Of course, this was to throw people off the scent because nobody played Norma Bates in that movie. So yeah, and I think a portion of the interior scenes in the film as well was shot in an abandoned house. It was scheduled for demolition. They basically had to postpone the demolition for 5 days while they actually shot footage in that. Yeah, so good film in my opinion, Tourist Trap. And Robert Burns, I think as well, the production designer who'd actually worked on Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and also The Hills Have Eyes, Wes Craven. He actually handled the art direction, and I think most of the special effects on this film as well, with like the mannequins and the physical manipulations and all that. I think that's pretty much all I really want to say regarding Tourist Trap. It's a slasher movie that's a PG-13, so it's not a film that's there's really no kind of sexual components in the movie. I wish I got a pound every time the killer said pretty. You could actually turn that into a drinking game. He does say pretty a lot during the course of this movie. So that's all I really want to say on Tourist Trap. So thanks a lot to everyone that listened. As I said, I do think it's a good film. I think it's one that's worthy of more attention, certainly. That's it for today. So thanks a lot to everyone that listened. If you've liked what you've heard, please feel free to subscribe. And I'll be back again soon to haunt you and torment you. Take care.